Olaf Tryggvason was king of Norway from 995 to 1000. He was the son of Tryggve Olafsson, king of Viking, and, according to later sagas, the great-grandson of Harald Fairhair, first king of Norway. Olaf played an important part in the conversion of the Norse to Christianity. He is said to have built the first church in Norway, and to have founded the city of Trondheim. A statue of Olaf Tryggvason is located in the city's central plaza. Historical information about Olaf is sparse. He is mentioned in some contemporary English sources, and some skaldic poems. The oldest narrative source mentioning him briefly is Adam of Bremen's Gesta Hammerbergensis Ecclesia Pontificum. In the 1190s, two sagas of Olaf Tryggvason were written in Iceland, by Oddr Snorrason and Gunnar Leifsson. Snorri Sturluson gives an extensive account of Olaf in the Heimskringla saga, using Oddr Snorrason's saga as his main source. The accuracy of these late sources is not taken at face value by modern historians, and the validity is a topic of some debate. The following account is mainly based on the late saga sources. Birth and early life. There is uncertainty about both the date and the place of Olaf's birth. The earliest Norwegian written source, the late 12th century Historia Norwegiae, states that Olaf was born in the Orkney Islands after his mother fled there to escape the killers of Olaf's father. Another late 12th century source, Agra af Norregs Konungasagum, says Olaf's mother fled to Orkney with Olaf when he was 3 years old. For the same reason, all the sagas agree that Olaf eventually ended up in Kiev in Rus, at the court of King Valdemar. The version in Heimskringla is the most elaborate, but also the latest, and introduces elements to the story that are not found in earlier sources. It states that Olaf was born shortly after the murder of his father in 963, while other sources suggest a date between 964 and 969. The later dates cast doubt over Olaf's claim to be of Harald Fairhair's kin, and the legitimacy of his claim to the throne. Snorri Sturluson claims in Olaf Tryggvason's saga that Olaf was born on an islet in Fjellandsvatnet, where his mother Astrid Eriksdottir, daughter of Erik Bjodeskal, was hiding from her husband's killers, led by Harald Greycloak, the son of Erik Bloodaxe. Greycloak and his brothers had seized the throne from Håkon the Good. Astrid fled to her father's home in Uppland, then went on to Sweden where she thought she and Olaf would be safe. Harald sent emissaries to the King of Sweden, and asked for permission to take the boy back to Norway, where he would be raised by Greycloak's mother Gunhild. The Swedish king gave them men to help them claim the young boy, but to no avail. After a short scuffle, Astrid fled again. This time their destination was Gardarvik, where Astrid's brother Sigurd was in the service of King Valdemar. Olaf was 3 years old when they set sail on a merchant ship for Novgorod. The journey was not successful. In the Baltic Sea they were captured by Estonian Vikings, and the people aboard were either killed or taken as slaves. Olaf became the possession of a man named Clercon, together with his foster father Thorolf and his son Thorgils. Clercon considered Thorolf too old to be useful as a slave and killed him, and then sold the two boys to a man named Clerk for a ram. Olaf was then sold to a man called Rees for a fine cloak. 6 years later, Sigurd Eriksson traveled to Estonia to collect taxes for King Valdemar. He saw a boy who did not appear to be a native. He asked the boy about his family, and the boy told him he was Olaf, son of Tryggve Olafsson and Astrid Eriksdottir. Sigurd then went to Rees and bought Olaf and Thorgils out from slavery, and took the boys with him to Novgorod to live under the protection of Valdemar. Still according to Heimskringla, one day in the Novgorod marketplace Olaf encountered Clercon, his enslaver and the murderer of his foster father. Olaf killed Clercon with an axe blow to the head. A mob followed the young boy as he fled to his protector Queen Aligia, with the intent of killing him for his infamous deed. Only after Alagia had paid blood money for Olaf did the mob calm down. As Olaf grew older, Vladimir made him chief over his men-at-arms. But after a couple years the king became wary of Olaf and his popularity with his soldiers. Fearing he might be a threat to the safety of his reign, Vladimir stopped treating Olaf as a friend. Olaf decided that it was better for him to seek his fortune elsewhere, and set out for the Baltic, raiding. Heimskringla states that after leaving Novgorod, Olaf raided settlements and ports with success. In 982 he was caught in a storm and made port in Wendland, where he met Queen Geira, a daughter of King Bur-Isolaf. She ruled the part of Wendland in which Olaf had landed, and Olaf and his men were given an offer to stay for the winter. Olaf accepted, and after courting the queen, they were married. Olaf began to reclaim the baronies which, while under Geira's rule, had refused to pay taxes. After these successful campaigns, he began raiding again both in Skane and Gotland. Alliance with Otto II. Holy Roman Emperor Otto II had assembled a great army of Saxons, Franks, Frisians and Wends to fight against the Norse pagan Danes. Olaf was part of this army as his father-in-law was king of Wendland. Otto's army met the armies of King Harald Bluetooth and Håkon Jarl, the ruler of Norway under the Danish king, at Danevirke, a great wall near Schleswig. Otto's army was unable to break the fortification, so he changed tactics and sailed around it, landing in Jutland with a large fleet. Otto won a large battle there, and forced Harald and Håkon with their armies to convert to Christianity. Otto's army then returned to their homelands. Harald would hold on to his new faith, but Håkon continued worshipping the old gods when he got home. Death of Geira and conversion. After Olaf had spent 3 years in Wendland, his wife Geira died. He felt so much sorrow from her death that he could no longer bear to stay in Wendland, and set out to plunder in 984. He raided from Friesland to the Hebrides. After 4 years he landed on one of the Scilly Isles. He heard of a seer who lived there. Desiring to test the seer, he sent one of his men to pose as Olaf. But the seer was not fooled. So Olaf went to see the hermit, now convinced he was a real fortune-teller, and the seer told him, "Thou wilt become a renowned king, and do celebrated deeds. Many men wilt thou bring to faith in baptism, and both to thy own and others' good, and that thou mayst have no doubt of the truth of this answer. Listen to these tokens. When thou comest to thy ships, many of thy people will conspire against thee, and then a battle will follow in which many of thy men will fall, and thou wilt be wounded almost to death, and carried upon a shield to thy ship. Yet after 7 days thou shalt be well of thy wounds, and immediately thou shalt let thyself be baptized." After the meeting, Olaf was attacked by a group of mutineers, and what the seer had foretold happened. So Olaf let himself be baptized. David Hugh Farmer, in the Oxford Dictionary of Saints, writes, "It is tempting to identify the seer with Saint Lyde, who lived on the island of St. Helens in the Isles of Scilly. By another account, he was baptized by Saint Aelfhar of Canterbury near to Andover, Hampshire in 994. However, Henrietta Laser, the author of Aelfhar's Oxford Nation Dictionary of Biography entry, states that Olaf was already baptized, and that the 994 event at Andover was a confirmation of his faith, part of a Danegeld treaty in which he agreed to no longer raid in England. Marriage to Gyda. In 988, Olaf sailed to England, because the thing had been called by Queen Gyda, sister of Olaf Cuerang, King of Dublin. Gyda was the widow of an earl, and was searching for a new husband. A great many men had come, but Gyda singled out Olaf, though he was wearing his bad weather clothes, and the other men wore their finest clothing. They were to be married, but another man, Alfvine, took objection, and challenged Olaf and his men to the Scandinavian duel or holmgang. Olaf and his men fought Alfvine's crew and won every battle, but did not kill any of them. Instead they bound them. Alfvine was told to leave the country and never come back again. Gyda and Olaf married, and spent half their time in England and the other half in Ireland. Ascent to the throne. In 995, rumours began to surface in Norway about a king in Ireland of Norwegian blood. This caught the ear of Jarl Håkon, who sent Thor a clacker to Ireland, posing as a merchant, to see if he was the son of Tryggvason Olafsson. Håkon told Thor that if it were him, to lure him to Norway, so Håkon could have him under his power. Thor befriended Olaf and told him of the situation in Norway, that Håkon Jarl had become unpopular with the populace, because he often took daughters of the elite as concubines, which was his right as ruler. He quickly grew tired of them and sent them home after a week or two. He had also been weakened by his fighting with the Danish king, due to his rejection of the Christian faith. Olaf seized this opportunity, and set sail for Norway. When he arrived, many men had already started a revolt against Håkon, who was forced to hide in a hole dug in a pigsty, together with one of his slaves, Kark. When Olaf met the rebels, they accepted him as their king, and together they started to search for Håkon. They eventually came to the farm where Håkon and Kark were hiding, but could not find them. Olaf held a meeting just outside the swine sty and promised a great reward for the man who killed the Jarl. The two men in the hole heard this speech, and Håkon became distrustful of Kark, fearing he would kill him to claim the price. He could not leave the sty, nor could he keep awake forever, and when he fell asleep, Kark took out a knife and cut Håkon's head off. The next day the slave went to meet Olaf and presented with the head of Håkon. The king did not reward him, and instead beheaded the slave. After his confirmation as king of Norway, Olaf travelled to the parts of Norway that had not been under the rule of Håkon, but that of the king of Denmark. They too swore allegiance to him. He then demanded that they all be baptized, and most reluctantly they agreed. Rule as king. In 997 Olaf founded his seat of government in Trondheim, where he had first held a thing with the revolters against Håkon. It was a good sight because the river Nid twisted itself before going into the fjord, creating a peninsula that could be easily defended against land attacks by just one short wall. Olaf continued to promote Christianity throughout his rule. He baptized America's discoverer Leif Erikson, and Leif took a priest with him back to Greenland to convert the rest of his kin. Olaf also converted the people and Earl of the Orkney Islands to Christianity. At that time, the Orkney Islands were part of Norway. It has been suggested that Olaf's ambition was to rule a united Christian Scandinavia, and it is known that he made overtures of marriage to Sigrid the Haughty, Queen of Sweden. But negotiations fell through due to her steadfast pagan faith. Instead he made an enemy of her, and did not hesitate to involve himself in a quarrel with King Svein I of Denmark by marrying Svein's sister Thyra, who had fled from her heathen husband Bur-Ilev, semi-legendary king of Wends, in defiance of her brother's authority. Both his Wendish and his Irish wife had brought Olaf wealth and good fortune, but, according to the sagas, they were his undoing, for it was on an expedition undertaken in the year 1000 to wrest her lands from Bur-Ilev that he was waylaid off the island Svolder by the combined Swedish, Danish, and Wendish fleets, together with the ships of Earl Håkon's sons. The Battle of Svolder ended in the death of the Norwegian king. Olaf fought to the last on his great vessel Ormrindlangi, the mightiest ship in the north, and finally leapt overboard and was seen no more. In the early 11th century a Viking chieftain named Tryggvi invaded Norway, claiming to be the son of Olaf and Gyda. His invasion was defeated by forces loyal to Cnut the Great's son Sven of Norway. Rumors of survival. For some time after the Battle of Svolder, there were rumors that Olaf had had survived his leap into the sea and had made his way to safety. Accounts reported by Oddr Snorrason included sightings of Olaf in Rome, Jerusalem, and elsewhere in Europe and the Mediterranean. Both King Ethelred the Unready and Olaf's sister Astrid allegedly received gifts from Olaf long after he was presumed dead. The latest sighting reported by Oddr took place in 1046. Forcible conversions. Olaf routinely used force to compel conversions to Christianity, including executions and torture of those who refused. Several instances of Olaf's attempts led to days of remembrance amongst modern heathens similar to the feast days of martyred Christian saints. Raud the Strong refused to convert and, after a failed attempt using a wooden pin to pry open his mouth to insert a snake, was killed by a snake goaded by a hot poker through a drinking horn into Raud's mouth and down his throat. Eyvind Keenriffer likewise refused and was killed by a brazier of hot coals resting on his belly. The possibly apocryphal figure, Sigrid the Haughty, was said to have refused to marry Olaf if it meant foregoing her forefathers' religion, upon which Olaf slapped her with his glove, an act that prompted her to unite his enemies against him some years later. Ancestors from the sagas.